I'm really happy to be here today with Katherine Bennett, who is starting a new YouTube channel called Choose Agape. And we've had a little bit of conversation via email, but I'm really looking forward to getting to know Katherine better. And I know one of the questions Katherine asked is, how do you get a YouTube channel up and running and make it successful? And since I don't really have any ideas about that, I'm going to ask my viewership. All of you who are listening, if you have ideas about how to expand the reach of a YouTube channel and how to make it more broadly listened by people, more broadly shared by people, give us your input. We're here. So Katherine, I would love to hear your backstory. I have listened to a podcast of you talking about your story, and it was extremely moving. And I would love to have you tell my viewers your story as well. And then kind of, if you could weave into that, how you got to where you are now, maybe how you got interested in this little corner of the internet and what you hope to do with your channel.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me on, Karen. It's really great to be able to chat with you today. As you say, I've just started this Choose Agape. It's my t-shirt channel. Katherine Bennett, the fashion designer, she had those t-shirts, Choose Love and Choose Life. And she said, if you want to get a message out there, put it in big letters and put it on a t-shirt. So that's exactly what I wanted to do. Because really, I think that the word love has become so misused and misunderstood. And so Choose Love, this is just to kind of prompt a different way to think about that. So my story of how I came to begin this channel, well, I grew up I was born in the 70s to what would have been then quite aged parents. So my mum was probably in her late 30s when she had me, and my dad would have been 40. And they, I don't know, how far back shall I go?
No, just tell whatever you think is pertinent.
Yeah, so maybe pertinent is that my mum was the eldest, the first of 7 children. She was born in Ireland, and she was very, very premature, and she wasn't expected to live. My granny had lost children before her, and they expected that she was about 2.5 pounds, that she wouldn't live. And so I think that the kind of the prescription then was just keep her warm, put her under a light and pray, and that's what they did. And she sort of beat the odds and did live, and had a very felt the love of her family and the love of God throughout her childhood. And so she had a strong faith. She was a really devout Catholic woman. And when she was at school, all the children were asked to write about what they wanted to be when they were older. And they were writing that they'd like to be actresses or singers or whatever. And this would have been in the 40s. And she wrote that she wanted to be a saint, which is, remarkable really for a young girl to write that. I wouldn't have written the same thing at that age. So she always had this strong Catholic faith. And I think at one point she thought it might take her to the convent, but that wasn't to be. And then, as I said, she met my dad quite late in life, and he was in England, which is where I was born. And so she moved over here, and she and my dad struggled to have a family for quite a while. And then my older brother was born, and he was also premature. And so he was in an incubator. Now it was the 70s, and they thought that she would lose him as well. And again, she was praying the rosary, and he survived. So then I come along, so she gets pregnant again 2 years later. It's now 1976. And she was in touch with German measles at the time. She had contact with someone with German measles. And so it was the mid 70s, and she was 40, early 40s, and she was considered an old mother, plus the risk of German measles, and she was advised to terminate the pregnancy, to terminate me. And she said, because we've talked about it, she's actually written a faith journey of her own, that she did consider it because she was frightened, because I think we're just human, and despite her faith, she was really worried about whether she'd be able to cope with a stillbirth or a severely disabled child. So she prayed again, and in a way she just felt, should I just be thankful for having the child we never thought we would have, which is my older brother? And is there a sense in which I'm just being foolish, trying to hang on to this baby? But thanks be to God, hang on she did. And I must have hung on to her pretty good, because I was born quite a healthy, overdue, big 8.5, 9-pound baby. So, really, I owe my life to the words, thy will be done, because ultimately my mum said, I'm frightened, God. I don't know if I can cope, but I'm going to put it in your hands, and your will be done, not mine. That same fiat, that's those same words that Our Lady used at the Annunciation, at the Visitation, sorry. So yeah, so that really was quite, that impacted my early life. We as a family, we had this deep Catholic faith. We attended mass regularly. I was one of the first girls to serve on the altar in our diocese, and so our faith meant a lot to us, and attending mass meant a lot to us. I felt very involved in the church and had a good experience of my Catholic faith. But throughout my childhood, my mum was struck down with various illnesses. She always seemed quite sickly, and I think what I found difficult was that she was, of all the people I knew, she was just such a good woman. She was just someone who would have a life of quiet sacrifice, quiet, humble sacrifice, and put others' needs first. And she had something wrong with her back when I was about 9 or 10, and she was actually in hospital for a long time. And so me and my brother were sent out to other families to be looked after. And this was a pattern I remember throughout my childhood, that she would succumb to some sickness or injury and illness. And I would say probably I started to feel a bit like maybe anger towards God. Why is it that this woman, so devout, who puts others first, is suffering in this way? And so many other people that I see who seem to have it easy. Now, I know we never really know whether people have it easy, but it seemed that way to me, in my innocence, I suppose. And so that was maybe the seed of just thinking, what's the point really? What is our religion for? What is our faith about? We're going to church, we're going through the motions, and here's my mum, suffering. And then she was diagnosed with cancer when I would have been maybe early secondary school here, so year 7, year 8. I was about 12, 13, and she was again quite stoical. She used to just, her prayers were not really about her being cured. I remember she used to always pray, God, I pray that I can live long enough to see my children through education. I pray that they may always know your love. I just remember her, whenever she was suffering, she'd just say, I offer it up, Lord. And it's always for others. I offer it up for my husband. I offer it up for my children. And I didn't really know what she was doing, offering this pain up, this suffering up. And the cancer then, regressed, or she actually was well for a number of years, and then it returned again, and again she had more surgery and treatment, and she seemed to be improving. And there was in fact, I graduated then. So my brother had been the first in our family to go to university. And then I was the second. So I just graduated and had achieved what Mum was praying for. I hope that I live long enough to see my children through education. And there was a really happy summer then. I think it was, I'm trying to think of the date. So it was about 97 and I'd graduated, and she and my dad came to my graduation, and my dad was due to retire. And I think we thought they can finally have this nice, happy retirement, step into retirement where they've, especially my mum had spent her life looking after others. She was a carer. She used to care for others and work in hospices and homes. And then she was diagnosed with terminal cancer then. So she fell over and things weren't quite right. So she went into hospital and had a scan, and they discovered that she had multiple brain tumours and they were inoperable. So she was told that she'd have, I think, 5 or 6 months to live. So yeah, that was difficult. And I was really quite angry at this stage, I would say, hurting and angry. And I just thought, what has it been about? She was born, she was premature, early life was a struggle, her own, experience of marrying late and struggling to have children and then being ill throughout there. I just thought, what's the point? What has she been doing, offering it up, going to mass? It hasn't helped her, even the irony is she went to Lourdes, Lourdes, the place in France where Our Lady appeared. So it's a Catholic pilgrimage. And she went to Lourdes, where a lot of people go to try and find peace, I suppose, but also possibly healing. And she bumped her head on the grotto, and she got a case of shingles broke out all across her face, all down the side of her body, and went through her eye here. And she wasn't cured of the cancer and came back with shingles. So it was pretty, it seemed pretty unfair, all in all. And then she lived for about, I think, 7 or 8 months, a bit longer than they thought. And then she died. And we were with her. We were all with her as she died, which was nice. It was peaceful, actually. You think, what would it be like to be with someone as they die? But thanks be to God, it was peaceful. And my dad was praying Hail Marys as she was slipping away, and he was sort of praying them louder. Hail Mary, full of grace. Almost like I'm praying them louder now as she's passing on to eternity. So so she died. And then I would say, not immediately, but soon after that, like the anger that the seed that had been born in my teenage years really started to grow. And those questions, why would a good God, those questions we all ask, why would a good God allow suffering? And most especially to someone who seemed to be so devoted to God and to his ways, and to try and live in his truth. So I just gave up on God, to put it bluntly. I just completely gave up. I just thought, I don't want anything to do with you. And yeah, I want to say I was an atheist, but I don't know, like many atheists, I often wonder with atheists whether they're just really angry with God. Like, I think potentially there was a time when I truly didn't believe in God, and that's quite a dark, sort of empty time. But so I spent most of my 20s just trying to just thinking Christians was stupid. Like, who are these people? You know, they're just fools. And I started to read I was studying theology actually and philosophy. I then did a master's in philosophy, and I started to read Dawkins and Dennett, and I was really impressed. And I watched Christopher Hitchens, and I thought, these are really impressive people. You know, they've got something to say, and it really resonated with me. And I thought, yeah, I suppose if I'm being honest, there's a sense of aligning myself with, I thought maybe Christians are stupid and these atheists are really clever, and I'm done with God anyway, because look at what happened, Mum. And I'm aligning myself now with this kind of cool intellectual crowd. So I went further than just not believing in God. I would probably try and disabuse anyone of their notions of God, try and learn as much as I could to try and, you know, show them how wrong they were. So that was what I, you know, spent quite a lot of my 20s doing.
So how did that impact your day-to-day life? So, I mean, did it change the way that you lived your life, or did it change the way that you, like, you had gotten a degree in philosophy? Did it change your whole perspective on the philosophy that you had learned while you were in school? Did it change the way that you looked for a job, or the way that you interacted with friends? Or, I mean, what did it actually look like when you were trying to be the cool kid on the block?
yeah, I'm so cool, being an atheist. I think, you know, it changed me in the sense that I didn't care as much for others and myself. I think there was always a sense that I had a purpose when I was younger, that, you know, that God created me for a purpose. And I think once I'd kind of made this head decision, this conscious decision, and of course my heart was broken as well, so it was a head and heart shift. I just felt I had no purpose. So and also a sense of, well, I can just do what I want and be what I want. And you know this idea of freedom, just doing whatever you want, you know, not this authentic freedom that you are free to flourish into the best person you can be, or the person God made you be, but just a freedom, an empty sort of shallow freedom of just, I can do what I want. So I thought, well, you know, I was smoking, I was drinking, I was doing all sorts that I shouldn't be doing, and I was hurting other people along the way, and myself. I'd had by this stage almost no relationship with my dad. My brother had moved abroad, my mum had died, and I had almost no relationship with my dad. And my dad was on his own, and he was old, you know, he was in his probably late 60s, early 70s now. And I just couldn't care. I'd ring him up and just think, oh, I'll ring him up and have a chat now and again. And I would find, I just got sick of it actually, because I would find that I would go from friendship to friendship and friendship group to friendship group, and I had no solid rock on which I was standing. And I started to become really aware of that it's hard to explain. I had, if I was with this person and we were discussing politics, I'd say this, I couldn't really care less. Like, maybe one day I'd say that I support this, and another day I might say I support this. And as long as I could maybe win the argument, or it was just having fun, engaging, but with no, I got to a point where I thought, I don't know who I am. You know, I don't actually know who I am or what I stand for, because all I seem to stand for is doing whatever I want to do. It doesn't matter if I hurt my dad, or if I this person with these people and this person with these people, because I'm just the creator of my own life, you know, and I'm the creator of my own destiny, and so I will decide the boundaries of everything. But yeah, so I think that's how it manifested in just this kind of nihilism, this sense of, and because ultimately I was still angry. I suppose it was on some level a kind of, I'm going to get back at God. I'm going to do things I know God wouldn't approve of.
You mentioned in one of our emails that you had also been listening to Sam Harris. And I know that Sam Harris has this idea that morality is obvious enough so that we can develop a morality that allows us to live in the world in a good way without having to resort to God or religion or anything else. So you were listening to Sam Harris at the time. And so when you got this feeling, I don't know who I am, I don't know what I stand for, did you start to think, oh, well, I can do the Sam Harris thing and develop my own morality? Or did you just feel kind of lost?
Yeah, probably a bit of both. I think definitely that hit me, that actually if there is no God, and I believe this now, if there is no God, then you sort of strip away the divine, and then you sort of necessarily strip away the natural law, the idea that there is a law within nature from a a divine law, and then the highest thing you have is human law, and that's it. So how can we say what's objectively right or wrong, but merely just this is right for me or this is wrong for me? So yeah, I think there was that sense that morality is almost meaningless, and even to the point where if I felt guilty, if I did lie, or if I did something that I would say is wrong, that I may have been raised to think was wrong, I just say that's a remnant of being raised as a Christian. And of course I feel guilty because I've been told that there's a God who disapproves. The truth is that it didn't sit easily with me. So I was having to convince myself of that. So yeah, that idea that morality is really ultimately without a God is nothing more than a subjective expression of what I believe to be, because there isn't truth out there that I need to discover. And of course we hear this all the time in the culture, it's my truth, so there isn't a truth, there isn't an objective truth out there. So there isn't a right and a wrong, it's just what's wrong for me and what's right for me. So I definitely justified things and said, well, it's okay for me.
I was really struck by that when I first moved to California. So I didn't become a Christian until I was 30. So I didn't grow up with all of the framework that you grew up with that gave you a picture of what the world is supposed to look like, right? Or that there is a higher truth or a higher morality. I didn't grow up with any of that, but I became a Christian when I was 30. And then I moved out to California when I was 40, after a lot of life happened in between. And when I first moved to California, I was working for an intercultural consulting firm. And we were, at that time, navigating the cultural differences between Japan and the US. But all the people that I worked with were people who had done graduate work in intercultural philosophy and anthropology and ideas like that. And their general idea the idea that was in their head that they lived within is that all culture is neutral, all cultures are equal, and that you can't judge another culture based on your own culture because all cultures are equal. But so there's no overarching truth that governs all cultures or that governs the way people behave within cultures. And because I had been a Christian for about 10 years and I had been a missionary for a part of that time, and I had read a lot of missionary books, and I had especially read the books of Don Richardson. I don't know if you've ever run into his work, Eternity in Their Hearts and Peace Child, and a number of books like this about cultures that are buried up in the mountains of Borneo, some tribe that was completely unreached until some Christian missionary went in there, and then they got to hear the story of that culture. Or another book is Bruchko by Bruce Olson, where he actually was captured by a tribe of cannibals in the mountains of Ecuador, a tribe that had never been reached. He had actually been wanting to reach them, but he couldn't get there any other way. So he just went off up in the hills by himself, and then he got captured by them and ended up being their prisoner for 20 years. And these are all true stories.
Yeah.
And so then you hear what these cultures are, and some of the imperatives of one of the cultures in, I believe it's Peace Child, is that betrayal is the highest value. So if you are the best at betraying your friend, if you're the best at making a friend and then betraying that friend, then you become chief of the tribe because you're the best, right? Mm. So I began to think about those things and think there's no way that culture can be neutral. I mean, really, I mean, if there's no, this is better than that, then I might as well just say, well, I could just betray people then because that's a high value in this other culture. And of course, nowadays, I guess that would be called cultural appropriation.
Yeah, right.
If I choose betrayal as my highest value, then I'm culturally appropriating. But yeah, so anyway, sorry for the interruption. You are now walking through this time period in your late 20s where you've kind of been cut adrift from everything you learned, and you're trying to justify living without any structure, and you're finding that kind of meaningless.
Yeah. Going back to you talking about that neutral ground, I think that's something I encounter a lot now. Is it's this idea that there is a neutral ground, and religious people are outside of the neutral ground. The neutral ground is right. It's where it's the good values and everything, equality, diversity, equity, all these sort of social justice but those are all good things. But you know that people who are religious, you've got a little bit of it, but you're outside of the. And I know Jonathan Pajot talks a lot about this idea as well, that there is no neutral ground. What is your highest value? Everyone is coming to things with their own perspective. You know, there isn't a neutral ground from which you stand. The atheists aren't in neutral space. Whereas, you know, they look at the atheists, say you're outside of the neutral space. Well, they're not in neutral space. So yeah, I was, as you say, adrift and sort of, and it wasn't that I wouldn't say I was like desperately unhappy. It wasn't. I felt this. The best way I can describe it is just this complete lack of anchor, like of really knowing who I am, and what the purpose of my life is, and what I'm about. Saint Augustine says, you created us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they find rest in you. And I didn't learn that or hear that until much later in my journey, but it completely resonated with me. You know, there was that restlessness for something, and I couldn't really articulate what it was, but I just knew that even if I had a job and money and friends and life wasn't awful, I just had this restlessness. So that was me in my 20s. Yeah, and around that time I made a poor choice and married a young guy that I was seeing at the time, and we ended up divorced. So I was, I don't know, 20, maybe only 28, divorced, no relationship with my dad, and just a kind of, I'd say probably lost. And I hadn't been in a church. I hadn't been to church for a long time. And I just wanted to go into a church. And what I wanted was my mum, you know, really. I think I just you know, and this is terrible. This is a terrible thing to admit, but it's part of the story. Is I even felt an anger because I thought, well, I don't have a great relationship with my dad. He's fine, like he's a nice guy, but he worked all the time and we didn't see one another that much, and I didn't feel like he really knew me in the way my mum did. And I thought, you know, and God took my mum, you know. It's not that I would have wanted my dad not to have died instead, but just that little thing that maybe God knew that I didn't want to admit to anyone, which is why mum, you know.
I really resonated with that when I heard your testimony before, because my mother died of cancer when I was 40. And she had one of those times where they told her you only have 5 months to live. And during that time, my father became very ill. So I was having to spend a lot of time with him and not able to spend a lot of time with her. And then she died. And I had that thought that you're talking about that consumed me to such a degree, but I felt so guilty about it. How can I have, you know, I'm a Christian. I was a Christian at the time. How can I resent the fact that my father survived when my mother didn't, you know? But the thoughts that came up in me were thoughts like, what if I have to, he and I have never had a relationship. What if I have to take care of him for the rest of my life? What if he's just going to be this albatross around my neck and around, and then the idea that I could even have thoughts like that I could be such a vile person to resent that God had given me the gift of still having my father there. And I'm looking at it as this great burden.
Yeah.
Because of, well, just shortly before that, my husband had left me and we had gotten divorced because he was gay. And so I was shattered by that. But then this thing happens and I wasn't able to really grieve the loss of my mother because I'm so consumed with all these other things. And then 4 weeks to the day after my mother died, my father died. And then I was really consumed with guilt that I'd had these thoughts about him, when instead of taking that 4 weeks where I could have really spent quality time with him, I have all this stuff going on in my head instead. And I think one of the things that all helped me realize is that we are incredibly complex creatures, and there's just no knowing what's inside of there. And that we rarely ever talk to people about these things because they're so painful and so confounding, and we feel so guilty about them. And so it doesn't become a part of the conversation. And I think that's one of the reasons that people get lost out there, because they have no place to talk about these things, right? Unless you go pay a therapist, and then the therapist, maybe you are kind of talking things through with the therapist, but it's not the same thing as being able to talk about these things with your friends or with your family or even with the people that are involved, right? So yeah, I mean, I really resonated with that. I understood exactly where you were at.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry that you went through that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, and to you, that's really it's tough. I mean, you had to, the fact that both you lost your parents within a very short space of time, and that's difficult. And yeah, that guilt. Yeah, thanks for telling me that. That is tough.
Well, let me just finish. The thing that helped me out of that was about 6 months or a year later, I met a woman. Well, I was reintroduced to a woman that I had known earlier in my life. And she could somehow tell that there was a lot that I needed to talk about. And she kind of forced me to come sit with her. She said, you need to talk. And I said, no, I'm fine. I'm fine, But she forced me to talk, and she sat and listened to me for 5 hours and and she was one of these kind of listeners that could keep you going, that could say the right thing at the right moment, that would get the thing continuing, right? And she got me to dump out all of that anguish. And it was like she was being Christ to me at the moment. And she told me that the reason that she did this for people was that she had had her own experience of 25 years of severe depression when she was serving on the mission field, but so consumed with guilt over her lack of ability to manage her thoughts and her emotions, until one time when she was home on leave, there was a nun who took her aside and said, you need to talk, and got her going and got her talking and dumping all this out. And then that nun reflected Christ to her in the listening. Yeah. And I always thought that was so powerful, that there is this, we need to be Christ to one another in that way, to really absorb the pain and let it wash over, right?
Yeah. Whatever you do to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you do it to me. Christ doesn't just have a body. Christ doesn't, like an accessory. We are the body of Christ. So we believe that, so when I look at you, I see the face of Christ. That's how it should be. And that, I wonder then if that maybe has spurred you on in this work you're doing, that the power of listening, communicating. Sounds like that was really, really important for you.
Well, I mean, it was transformative in my life for sure. Yeah. I mean, I think ultimately that little seed of doubt and anger and guilt and shame would have grown larger and larger and larger until it obscured everything, just as it did for you when you were a young woman, right?
Yeah. So definitely I was not in a good place, and feeling that you've described that. I mean, mine's a different story, and I thank God that I have a really good relationship with my dad now, who's still with us. He's fantastic, like he's just hilarious. But at that point I actually was, I think, quite low enough that I went into church. I was low enough that I went to church, desperate times. But that's it, isn't it? That's the thing, that people sometimes think, oh, I'm not holy enough to go to church or to be a Christian. I'll wait until I'm a good person because you're a good person. That couldn't be further from the truth. It's a hospital for the sick. It's Jesus didn't come, to be with, what's it he says in scripture, he came to be with the sinners, and we're all sinners. So that's exactly the place that I was meant to be at that time. And I think then I just fell on my knees and was like, at this stage I was just crying. And I think being honest with myself, that I had been hurting since losing mum and hurting others, and going further, as far away from God as possible, because I associated a life of devotion to God as one of suffering and thanklessness, and I didn't want any of it. And so nothing happens in like these exact moments, but just my memory of it is that I just kind of expressed to God, either verbally out loud or just in my being, that why did you allow my mum to suffer, or why do you allow suffering, and what sort of God are you, and what on earth was my mum doing offering it up? And I just got this sense, I would say a word as clear as that, the cross. You can see the crucifix there behind me. And I looked up at the crucifix in this church, and I saw Jesus' scourged body on the cross. And there was just a sort of sense of, that Jesus wasn't just a good man. He was, if the Christians are right, he was God himself. He was goodness itself. And here he was, beaten and scourged and whipped and tortured and mocked and ridiculed and rejected and spat upon in the most violent and horrible way, and hung up, stripped of all dignity and everything, to be mocked for all to see. And I'm asking the same question: why did my mum suffer? And there I am looking at the crucifix with Jesus on. And then it became very clear to me, and I should have known this, and I think because I was raised in the faith we just used to go through the motions. Not, my mum was very devout, but we weren't really taught, I would say, weren't formed very well in the faith. The formation wasn't, so I didn't really know why we did what we did. I just quite liked it when we did it. But I looked at that crucifix, and then I looked all around, and it just hit me that the cross is not the end of the story. The cross is not the end of the story. That crucifix hanging there, and then the church I'm in, the stained glass windows, the pillars vaulting heavenward, the altar, that eternal glow of the Ner Tamid. It just hit me that the resurrection is the answer. That it permeates everything. Our culture, our art, our architecture, our stories, that this is not just another dead man among billions. This was, Peter Crave talks about Jesus' shot, split time, BC, AD. It was an earthquake that transformed everything, and still today, permeates everything. And I thought that death on that cross was not for nothing, and no suffering is for nothing. I just had this sense that what my mum was doing when she was offering up her suffering was asking God to take it and to put it on the cross with Jesus, and to transform it the way Jesus' death transformed the world, the way Jesus' death and resurrection changed everything. And she was saying, take it, I have to live it anyway, and do something with it. Like, that's just so powerful, and things didn't change overnight, but that realization that it wasn't what I thought it was. She wasn't just uttering nonsense or just this sort of useless, empty thing. There was something real happening. And I know that because of how my life is now. I absolutely know that, and believe that I won't go into loads of detail about those years in my 20s, but to say that I'm where I am now is nothing short of miraculous from where I was. And my mum's suffering, I won't know until I'm there, but I believe that she has accomplished her childhood ambition to become a saint. So in our faith, we sort of say that's our purpose. I talked about purpose is ultimately it's to be a saint. And we know the saints that the Catholic Church acknowledges and says through intercessions and miracles, but actually anyone in heaven is a saint. And so I believe that my mum is a saint, and that she is doing great work from heaven. So it wasn't instant, but that was the start, I think, of then thinking, this the anger starting to dissipate. But even then, I was now in sort of early 30s. There was still that pride. So I thought, okay, there's something to this Christianity. Yeah, this nice guy Jesus, there's something about him. And I remember I have happy memories of going to church as a kid. But I don't want I want to find a church that will have women priests, because equality demands that. And I want a church that will maybe be open to same-sex marriage, and I want a church that would not frown on IVF or surrogacy. And I started to say, I'm starting to think about going back to Christianity, and Jesus is a nice guy. I had this vision of Jesus being like a hippie dancing around Galilee, like he's just so lovely and nice and kind. And so I was going to find a church that fit with everything I thought. Basically, I'll find a church to fit with what I think is right. Yeah. And so it wasn't going to be the Catholic Church. So that's something I was pretty sure about. But there was just this nagging little doubt. So I was thinking, well, why were my ancestors, my mum and her parents before her, and why were they Catholic? What I'll do is it gives the faith of my ancestors a chance to defend itself. So I'm going to really find out about it as best I can, and find out why they've got it so wrong on all these issues. You know, they're just so wrong. I need to find out and then help others, encourage others to see how wrong they are. And of course, I mean, I think well, truth is truth, and goodness and beauty. And the deeper I delved into trying to understand the faith of my forefathers and the faith that mattered so much to my mum, the more I felt this shrinking feeling. You know, I was so puffed up, I think, by my own sin, you know, that I thought the church needs to shift to fit me. And one of the first things I did was actually read the Gospels, actually spend some time reading the Gospels. And the Jesus that I met in the Gospels was not the Jesus that I thought I knew. Yes, Jesus is loving and forgiving and merciful, but he calls us to something greater. And it's, you know, this idea of revelation, it started to hit me that revelation isn't revelation. If we think we know it all already, the whole point is it should be something that is revealed to us that we couldn't have known through our own ideologies and our own ideas. So reading the Gospels, learning about my faith, reading the Catechism, trying to understand these sticking points, why all these things that I had a problem with, you know, with the church, why doesn't it do this? Why doesn't it allow this? I would try and find out why. And in finding out why, I thought I'd find out why and reject it. But instead, I found out why, and I thought it was beautiful. I just thought it was, yeah, absolutely beautiful. And around that time, so everything sort of came together, and this is Mum up there. I got a new job and I met a Catholic, and he was a bit unlike some of the Catholics that I'd met growing up, who I might say were kind of cultural Catholics. You know, they'd almost say, I'm a Catholic, but we don't believe this, or I'm a Catholic, but yeah, we all use contraception anyway, and yeah, we're not. And I sort of thought, well, what's the church offering if no one really takes it seriously? It's not offering much. Mm-hmm. And so this guy, and then a couple of other people along the way I met, were so authentic. You know, they were just so authentic. They weren't embarrassed to be Catholic. They just lived their faith, and they talked about the difficulties, but they were just on fire for Christ and for his church. And this is how it seemed to me. And so I was really, that just felt real in a way that a lot of the people I'd been spending time with in my 20s, that it didn't feel like there was a real, it was so it just didn't feel real. I thought, gosh, these people just feel so real and grounded. And although I disagree with them at this stage, there's something attractive about that. And so that's the journey, and then finding out about my faith. So I would say then the head did shift. So there was an intellectual shift where I thought, actually, I can make sense of what the church is doing, what the church is teaching. Not only can I make sense of it, but I can see that the beauty of it, the goodness of it. But the heart hadn't totally shifted, and I started going to a little chapel then at work, and sat while a group of people prayed the rosary, and I was just very much an onlooker. And they also had exposition of the Blessed Sacrament. So the so in our faith, we believe that's the real presence of Christ in the host, the consecrated host. And during this time, absolutely, this internal shift just happened. Just this internal shift where I couldn't, I just wanted more. You know, I wanted to be able to fully be in full communion with my church, to receive Christ's body. And I knew that I couldn't at that stage, because I hadn't gone to confess. You know, I didn't want to either. The church teaches that I couldn't, but also I could see why not, and so I didn't want to. And so then I was just on a long journey then, where I had to get an annulment. So there was, I wanted to sort of, and I went to confession, and I confessed like 30 years of sins, because it had been, it was 20 years since I was early in my childhood, since I'd been to confession. And that was just a really, really beautiful experience. I can't speak to everyone's experience of confession. I don't know whether they have the same, but I just felt this absolute unburdening, and the love of God, the mercy of God, that it was like that prodigal son going home to his father, you know, and it was beautiful. So that's the where I am. and because of that, you know, that real love of that, I suppose, my faith. And you asked about the channel at the beginning. I just want to help people who may find themselves in the same position as me, particularly, I suppose, with the Catholic faith, but just life in general. Like, life's confusing, and, you know, sometimes it feels like there's no answers. So to explore those sort of questions.
Well, and I think especially because you can speak to what that feels like in your 20s. I think there are a lot of young people in their 20s that are going through that same kind of experience that you had. So I think you have much to speak to them about. So now you're a mom.
So now I'm a mum, a wife and a mum. So I met Phil, and he's from a Catholic family as well. We've been on a journey together, and I've got 2 beautiful kids. I've got 3 stepkids, and they're just fabulous. Yeah, and just, you know, also just being a wife. I know, and you've talked about this on your show as well, about being a wife and a mother. I work as well. I'm a teacher, and I do other work for the diocese and things, but it's just such a blessing. It's just so joyful. Like, it's exhausting but joyful. And my worry, I think, today is that, so working in schools, I see there's quite a drive, especially with young women, to say you can be anything you want to be, and then, but hang on, a CEO. You know, you can work in the top law firm. There's programs for young women at school. I don't know about over there, but here, to you know, to get them into STEM, into science jobs, and to try and right that injustice of the patriarchy. And I'm not saying that there weren't, you know, that women, you know, you talked about Jordan Peterson earlier. Women and men have both had it tough, and various, you know, throughout history, and certainly women have had it very difficult. But I think that's all great, but I think also, is there a place to say, yes, of course you can be a CEO. There's nothing, your intellect isn't stopping you. You're not an inferior sex. You can be, you can work 12, 14-hour days if that's what you want to do. Of course you can. But there's also a place to say it's also fine to want to be and beautiful to want to be a wife and a mother. So I think there's a place for saying both. But I did a talk at school once about the vocation of being a mum, and quite a few of the girls came up to me afterwards, and they would have been like 17, and they were whispering in hushed tones. They said, "Miss, can we just say thank you for telling us about being a wife and being a mum and wanting to be, because we want to be, but we feel a bit like we can't say that." So I think that's a shame that young women don't feel that that's actually a perfectly noble and lovely ambition, and it doesn't have to be all you do.
Well, and I think I'm remembering back to 1989, I guess, 1990, somewhere in there, when I first came back to the United States after my husband left me. I went to work for the Job Corps, which is in the United States, it's a government program that takes in kids that have been out on the street, that have not gotten a high school education for whatever reason, and helps them finish their high school education and gives them some vocational training, like teaching them how to be a plumber or a bricklayer, something like that. And they live in dormitories, and they have rules. They have to get up every morning and make their bed, and they have to help clean the bathrooms, and they have to help in the kitchen, and they have very, very structured lives. They try to teach them how to come from being drug-addled, street-dwelling, troublemakers, and give them a very structured life, like the military.
Yeah.
But they were trying a new program where they were offering beginning college classes for some of the kids who had finished their high school degree, to give them a taste of what college would be like if they wanted to go to college once they left. This was a 2-year program. So once they leave the program, do they want to go to college? So I had come in to teach some freshman level composition. And, I couldn't forthrightly talk about the gospel or anything in there because it's a government program, but I was just trying to be myself. And on the very last day, I had set it up so we would have the final the day before, and then on the last day I gave them a choice. We could play games, or we could do whatever you wanted to do during this time. And that a number of the young people said, "Well, we'd like to hear your story." And I thought, well, okay, that's good. So I told my story, a little bit of my story, to these young people. And what surprised me the most was that after I was done, rather than everybody just leaving, 4 or 5 of the girls hung around afterwards, and they came up to me. And what they said was, "How do we say no? We'd like to know how to say no, because it seems like that's all the boys are ever interested in. And if we don't say yes, then we're not accepted. We're not real people. So how do we say no?" That is so tragic. That's the big question that the young women have, is that I am nothing but a sex object, and the only way that I can be accepted is to say yes to everybody, right?
Yeah. But the culture is so confused and incoherent, as far as I can see. Over here we've got this outcry that women aren't safe on the streets, and that there's the mayor of London's talking about having to teach anti-misogyny to primary school children, so they respect women. Not that people can always seem to define what a woman is, so you need to respect women, but we're not sure what a woman is, and you need to be safe on the streets, but we must be able to act how we want, wear what we want. There's an incoherence, I think, where young people, all people, are just thirsty for truth and love. They're just thirsty, they're hungry for love. And I think sometimes they think that this certain route in life is going to bring them love.
Mm-hmm.
And it's empty, and they give themselves away because that's just the culture. Let's just teach kids how to be safe, how to protect yourself, how to contracept, and then go out and you'll once you do that, it's all about harm reduction. Let's just reduce harm. But they're not told. Well, they are by some people and in some quarters, and actually over here we do have church schools, state-run church schools. So yeah, they're just hungry for that, for real authentic love, but they seek it in ways that are empty. So they're saying to you, what they say about saying no to a boy because that's just what they feel he wants.
Mm-hmm.
And also young men, and again, earlier we talked about Jordan Peterson. What I think is really powerful and important and beautiful about what Jordan Peterson says to young men is, it seems to me anyway, is you can be so much more. So young girls, you're worth so much more, and young men, it's not just about giving in to every single impulse or desire. I always say to our own children, that the perfect model of a man is Christ. And who is Christ? He protected women. He stood up for their dignity. He didn't let perhaps the misogyny of the time influence the way he treated them. So he had a respect for women. He didn't dismiss them. And he stood up to the most powerful man in all of the Roman Empire, the Pontius Pilate, and said, "You'd have no power over me." This is a man. This is a man who says in St. Paul's letters, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her." That's tough. It's tough to be a man, to make sacrifices. I talked about Choose Agape. What is love? If love is just a transient feeling, they come and go, then I've fallen out of love with you. But it's a choice. It's a choice to will the good of the other for the other's own sake. And that's what Christ shows us, and that's what Christ shows young men. And I think Jordan Peterson is kind of, maybe not hasn't explicitly spoken in Christian terms, but saying actually life isn't just about indulging every pleasure. It is suffering. We talked about suffering earlier, but that out of suffering and sacrifice can come something so beautiful. And in a marriage, if I'm looking after my husband's needs and making sacrifices for his good, and he's doing the same for me, then both our needs are met in love, rather than selfishly looking to our own needs. Now, we don't always get that right, and we're sinners, we're weak, we're not perfect, but to have that model to look at. So I feel for young men, and young women.
I think one of the advantages of marriage in terms of having our needs met is that our spouse can often see better than we can what are our actual needs and what are the things that we just think we need, right? Or I know a lot of times that I can get caught up in cycles of denial and say things that I think are absolutely true, and actually they're just filled with victimhood and denial and blaming and everything else, but my husband, he can see through that, and he can tell me, this is what you're doing. Right? Which if I didn't have that partner to bounce things off of that way, and often he's the one I'm blaming, but because he's also a Christian, he can honestly speak into that. Maybe sometimes there's a little edge on it when he speaks into it, but because I'm a Christian, I can receive it and say, wait a minute, there's something there I need to listen to. So I think sometimes people think, in Christianity, everybody has to be nicey nice all the time, and that communication is always expected to be nicey nice and perfect, and you never, but what it actually means is that because we are dedicated to truth, that we're willing to accept the pain of hearing truth about ourselves, and sometimes willing to inflict a little pain to speak truth to the other. But because underneath that all is love, because agape doesn't just mean being nice, right? I mean, Christ, when he went in and drove the money changers out of the temple, that too was love. When he spoke to the Pharisees and said, "You vipers," that too was love.
Yeah.
Because everything that, if we accept the biblical truth that God is love, then everything he does, everything he chooses is for the good of the other.
Yeah.
And so to see him through that lens, I think really helps us understand what it means to love one another.
Yeah. That word nice it just doesn't cut it. Like that. It's just too weak a word. It's love. Love fights. Ask any parent. Love fights. Love is a choice, and it isn't without empathy and without feeling, but it is more than that. And so I think sometimes even our own faith can be twisted and used against us. Well, you're a Christian, you should be nice, or you're a Christian, you should be. Of course, we should be nice, but we should love one another. And the idea that love is a commandment, you can't command a feeling, so God commands us to love one another. So it must be, I can't tell you right now, I want you to feel desperately sad. You can't do that. But what we can do is make choices. And so we choose, and it's difficult, isn't it? It's really tough. We talked about seeing Christ in the face of others. It's really hard. The Christian life is tough if we take it seriously, and it's beautiful, and it is, it gives us so much, but it calls a lot from us as well. And yes, we are called to not just those people that we get on with, but to all people that we meet, to love them. And that does mean sometimes, as you say, with your husband and my relationships as well, to just speak in truth. And that is not always just telling you what you want to hear. And in the culture, I think the culture is very much bound up in telling people what they want to hear. And that makes it very difficult for young people growing up, because they grow up and they don't know how to cope then when they don't feel that's constantly what they're affirmed. Just as you are, you're fine just as you are. I wasn't fine just as I was. I'm still not fine just as I am. It's a journey. And again, that idea Jordan Peterson speaks about, you are worth so much more. You can be so much more. So there's something insulting about saying to young people, look, you're fine like you are, really, So yeah, it's love is not nice, is not I think the right word.
I think he says it's not only that it's not enough when someone says something like that to us, but it feels completely hopeless then. It's like,
yeah, right.
Then this is what I'm going to be the rest of my life? Is this it? Am I going to be this? I mean, I can easily fall into that thing where there are days that I'm so aware of my own sin and darkness in my own thinking and my failures, and if I fall into it and think this is it, this is all I can be.
Yeah.
And I actually fell into a path like that for a while when I was in my I would say my late 50s, early 60s, where I just sort of thought, well, I guess this is as far as I'm going to go. I'm just going to ride it out from here on in, and just until I die.
Right.
And it was even though I was a believer and I stayed in the faith and everything else, it just felt very bleak. And I have nothing more to accomplish. And I just can't rise above my own problems. I just can't do it. It's just too hard. And I had this feeling, I want somebody else to fix me.
Yeah.
Maybe if I went to a therapist could just wave a magic wand and just fix me, so I wouldn't have all these feelings anymore and I wouldn't be stuck. And that is I had started to rise out of that just a little bit when I ran into Jordan Peterson. And then he sort of gave me that impetus to kind of, you're not ever stuck. It's always this trajectory. And even if the trajectory is just a little bit better than yesterday, at least today is a little bit better than yesterday. And it's not about who I am in comparison to any other person, but it's who I am in comparison to who I was yesterday. Am I making the effort to just take that next step, to just move a little bit closer?
Yeah.
And if our goal is always to reach out for the high calling of God in Christ Jesus, that's our aim, is to just get a little bit closer and to have that desire in our hearts to be closer to him and to want to help others to be closer to him. And that all of that requires daily sacrifice, which after a while you just get tired of hearing that, like, really, more sacrifice, but that's really where the beauty comes in life. And Jordan Peterson, this person who, people keep trying to trap him to talk about what faith really means to him, but he of all people has been able to articulate that better than anybody else, that it's that now I lost the thread. but anyway, it's the idea of that sacrifice is giving up something of today for what is coming tomorrow, and that the future can be better if you're willing to accept the pain of today, which is basically, is that Hebrews, I forget where it is in Hebrews, but it says that Christ, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of God the Father. The joy set before him, he was looking out ahead at the joy set before him. And what was that joy? That joy was that he could be with his people. I am with you. And that accomplishing what he accomplished on the cross would allow him to bring us along with him, so that he would be with us.
Yeah.
And
well, that sacrifice is true. You do feel that, like, that makes me laugh, the way you say you'll sacrifice again. You do think that's what I was talking about in my story about my mum, really. And so it is tough, but I think also where Jordan Peterson says it's he's speaking like I know him, that it's going to happen anyway. It's just the human condition. We can't avoid suffering, and Christ didn't come to take away suffering, but to fill it with his love. And that's what I really got from my mum's sacrifice. And I talked a bit about my dad earlier. My dad is now nearly 90, and we have such a really lovely relationship. And I see him now every week. I visit him every week, and we go for a walk together in the woods, or we go for a cup of tea, and I know him and he knows me. And there is something about the big picture that I just can't see, and that we can't see, and that God can see. It's Job, isn't it? In the suffering, God, we just have to trust God. And I look at not just that with my mum, but other times of suffering. And so what helps us to give us hope and to help us cope, and you talked about the time in your life in your early 60s where you were feeling that kind of that stuck, that actually as Christians we can say, we don't understand what's happening, God. I don't know the big picture, and I'm frightened and I'm hurting, but I just know that you know, and I want you to use whatever it is for good. And so I definitely can see that if my dad had gone, let's say that silly thought I had, and not my mum, I would never have forged this relationship with him now, that he has grown and changed as a person, and so have I, and all my relationships with people are better and deeper and richer. And I think my mum when she had to go. I don't know, she wasn't expected to live days, let alone 60 something years. So I can either look at it like, why does she have to go for the rest of my life? And by my suffering is by no means, you know, a terrible story. It's quite a common story. I know that, and people have suffered a lot worse. But or I can just say as a Christian, there is a big picture, and I don't know why she had to, but I know that it's been transformative. And so we have to do that with our own. I'm called to do that, and I'm a wimp, and I find that difficult, you know. But that's what I have to hang on to. Is, Lord, I give it to you. I'm struggling here.
Mm-hmm.
Do something with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my husband and I were just reflecting on that last weekend, because we have a lot of people that we know right now that are going through really deep waters, really terrible struggles, and that we're praying for. And we come to a place sometimes where we're praying and we're praying and we're praying, and we're not seeing the forward motion that we would love to see, you know. And so all sorts of questions come to mind, you know. Am I not praying enough? Am I not praying the right way? Why do these wonderful people have to suffer this way? I mean, all of these questions arise. And yet, at the end of the day, it is not the quality of my faith that really matters, because it's who I have the faith in. And Christ is, he's the one who can see far beyond all of these things. I mean, he understands exactly where everything fits and what is being accomplished in each human heart, and how their hearts are connected with all these other hearts that are being changed and transformed, and how our hearts are being changed and transformed just through the process of praying. And not only the process of praying, but the process of talking about what that experience of prayer is. And all of these threads go out in so many directions and go through our minds in so many ways, and in our hearts. And for us to think that we can figure it out, you know. I had to chuckle when you were talking about how in your 20s you had this time period of pride, being all puffed up, and I mean, I hope that you still have that once in a while, because I certainly do.
Yeah.
Right? I get lost in thinking that I have the answers and that I know something, and then I have to remember, wait, that's just all this puffy stuff that's hanging on the outside, you know.
I mean, it's a lifelong battle, isn't it? It's a lifelong battle, because I think that's the, you know, of all the sins, that's the one I think that keeps us from God, is just, you know, I did it my way. I know the way. I don't need you, God. And of course it's always there, because we're fallen creatures, and we're also just mad, you know. We choose against God, and we see that it's not good for us, and we do it again anyway, you know, even though we've seen that it isn't doesn't help us flourish, we still do it. But yeah, God's got the big picture, and I think it's really hard to trust that, but that when you do, when you just sort of release, there's something so beautifully freeing about that as well. Because if it was all on us, the pressure, you know, that's just immense. I don't know how to heal my relationships. I don't know what, you know. So sometimes my prayer is just, I don't even know what to say, God. Just, you know, I just leave it with you. And prayer's funny as well, isn't it? I know someone who said to me recently that they've been praying for years that I would become head teacher at a certain school that we know. And I'm thinking, I don't want to be head, like, that is so far off my radar. I just work part-time in teaching, and that I'm never going to go back to full-time. So that's just not going to happen. I don't want it to happen. And yet someone's praying that happens, you know, for me. Mm-hmm. So there's so many things. There's people's free will and their intention, and what God's got the overall. And as long as we're it's not a wish list, is it? It's not I want this, this, and this. Oh, it hasn't happened. There's no God. It's more just saying, if it aligns with your will, then so be it.
So you said that you had a degree in philosophy.
Yeah, I've got a degree in theology and a master's in philosophy. Yeah.
Well, so you just brought up the wish list. Okay. And so I've been pondering this lately. And so my memory's not very good, but I had just written this down as a note on the corner of a piece of paper. So I'm just going off this note, not on what I actually did read in depth at some point about Gabriel Marcel. And he had talked about the difference that hope is not a desire, but hope is associated with will. And so then that made me start thinking, well, then if hope is will, then perhaps wish is based on desire. And maybe that's the big difference between wishing and hoping, because a wish gets all tied up with our own desires, but a hope is actually an active movement of the will towards that which is good. Does that make sense from a philosophy standpoint?
Yeah, so I can't remember half the stuff I did. It's so valuable, this education.
But I know that philosophy does give you a certain way to look at the world. And since I never really studied philosophy, the only thing I know of it are these little bits and drabs that I read about or that I talk with other people about.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it makes sense to me what you're saying, not to do with having any academic qualifications, but the idea that we wish for things does seem to me to align with our desire. It's like I want this, this, and this. I know people who say to me, I prayed and I didn't get what I asked for, so there's no. I know people, adults who say this, so. But I think we're just like big children, and we sort of stamp our feet sometimes and say, I want it to be like this, because it's that pride thing. So hope, yeah, possibly then hope is more handing it over to the will. That seems to make sense to me. Yeah.
Well, because of, that verse, faith is the substance of things hoped for.
Yeah.
The things hoped for are the things that are laid out in the future. Kind of connected up with when Jordan Peterson talks about the future calling us forward.
Yeah.
That somehow our hopes and the future calling us forward, they get connected at some point. And so I guess it would be connected with this idea that, when one of my physicist friends says that when the scientists talk about strong emergence, he said they're really getting themselves into trouble, because emergence implies that which is coming up from beneath is also being called by something that's from above, which is really a very great picture of the ground of being and being itself, and God being overall, but also drawing everything up into himself. And so it's that same kind of a picture. So if hope is this thing that we project out into the future, but then there's also that thread of interest of that catches our attention. Like right now you have this thread of interest of starting a YouTube channel. So something has captured your attention out there and said, I want to move towards that. But that thing that's drawing you forward is not just random. I mean, there's a purpose in that, right? And so your hope is going towards that, and active, you're taking active steps to get there, and then it's also drawing you forth.
Yeah. I think that idea of purpose is key, because you need to. Everything has a purpose, doesn't it? And so ultimately I have a goal, which is as a human person, my purpose is to be with God. And so I suppose that informs then, like I talked before about feeling a bit like I was on quicksand or shaky ground, this sort of rock now, this anchor, that informs then everything. So everything is with that telos, that purpose in mind. So I am a created being, and I've been created for a purpose. So you look at any man-made object, and it started as this idea to achieve some end. And so we're the same. So I believe, so we are created to be something different to all other creatures, able to see ourselves in space and time in a way that all other creatures aren't able to do. And so that calls to us what our purpose is. It has to be related. Our purpose can't merely lie in the same, living the same way as my dog lives, eating, drinking, playing, having sex. It can't possibly lie in those things, because you can see we're different creatures. And so the purpose and my hope, as you were talking about, what we're working towards, has to be connected to what sort of creature I am. And we talked before about the culture. In the culture, we can't even agree on what sort of creature we are. What kind of created thing am I? And when I examine what kind of created thing I am, I will start to be able to reason what my purpose is from that. But if that's all up for grabs, and there is, you can just create who you are, then I think what you also lose then is a sense of purpose, of what is it I am here for, just to create myself.
So what you're working on right now, you're writing, and you're doing podcasting, and now you're going to start a YouTube channel, and I'll put all of that in the descriptions. I'll give links to all of that in the description section. But do you have an idea of what it is that you want to do on your YouTube channel?
Yeah, so I just I was working full-time teaching, or 4 days over 5, and I've cut down on those hours, and I just have the chance now of do a bit of writing. I work with Catholic Voices over here, and do a little bit of work for them, and writing and a bit of podcasting, and have just last month started doing this YouTube channel to do this, to have conversations like we're having now. I'd like to do more of that, and I've got a few of those planned out over the next few weeks, which is great. I'm hoping to be talking to Dr. Paula Boddington, who you've had on your show a few times. She's great. So we've met and had a chat about some things in real life.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So and we'll have a chat like this on YouTube. And also, as I say, for what drives me, I think is I believe when it comes to at least the Catholic faith, there is a lot of misunderstanding about it, what it is, and those were the things that were barriers for me. So also what motivates me is to say, let's look at some of these barriers and try and break them down. And they may, for some people, they may remain, and people may say, no, I'm still like, I still don't like what the church is, but it doesn't matter in a sense. People will make their free choices, but it's just, and that's fine. But for me, it's about just trying to, I'll just be forever thankful to those people who help me understand my faith, learn my faith, and just be authentic Catholics. And so I want to try and do that and share that with others on my channel.
So you have Dr. Paula Boddington, and do you have any other want-tos that you'd like to talk to? I know I have some want-tos that I'd like to talk to, but I can't figure out how to get in touch with them. So, I mean, that to me is the biggest challenge. How do you get contact information for people that you'd like to talk to?
Yeah, I mean, then we're the blind leading the blind, because I don't know. I had a great chat with a guy over here, this English guy called Mark Lambert, and he's a Catholic. He writes a blog, and he's lovely, and he's got a very difficult story of suffering. He lost a child, and he shared some of that on my as a guest on when I interviewed him recently, and he's great. And there's a friend of mine. She's a Nigerian mum. She's raising 3 boys here in London, and she is going to be talking to me about her upbringing as a Catholic in Nigeria and raising the boys here in London. And I've got a few There's an American priest, Father Joshua Waltz, who's fantastic. He's got some great videos. He talks similarly to Jordan Peterson. I think he speaks also to young men about about the call, what it means to be a young man, I suppose, and hopefully we're going to have a conversation. So there's a few people I'm hoping to chat to soon, but like you, there's lots of people I'd love to speak to, but I'll just have to see. Like Twitter, I only joined Twitter a few weeks ago, so I'm still really getting to know, and in a sense, if anything that we say or anything that's said lands on one pair of ears and someone says, oh, that resonates, then that's great. That's one more than it would have done if we hadn't done it. So it's just having a go, isn't it, and putting it out there and seeing what comes of it.
Well, I'm going to say again that I would love to talk to Stephen Wolfram, but I don't have any contact information for him.
There we go.
And I'm reading this book, The Truth and Beauty by Andrew Klavan.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful book, just a wonderful book, where he explores the lives of the Romantic poets and how their lives and their work really helped him in getting a deeper understanding of the gospel. And so it's a great book. And I am in conversation with his handler and hopeful that I will be able to have a conversation with him about that book. So I'm working on that right now, but I haven't got the go ahead yet.
Oh, wow. Sounds like you're close though. So hopefully.
Yeah. And I'm going to have a conversation soon with Esther Meek, who is the philosopher of covenantal epistemology. So I'm really looking forward to that one. And of course, I want to talk to Paula again. I would love to have Paula Boddington for a cup of tea in a real environment like you did.
A cup of tea. Yeah, we did. It was lovely. Yeah. She's taller than I imagined. It's funny being on in fact, you and Paula talked a bit about that, the senses, that there's so much more to a person and interacting with a person than just what you see. Yeah. Yes. So yeah,
we have a life group and there's like 15 people in our life group, and we've been meeting on Zoom for like 2 years because of COVID. And one guy joined our group during the time that we were in COVID, and so I'd never met him in person. He just looks like a normal human being on the screen. And then we had a live get together here at the house a month or so ago, and he walks in and he's 6'7" inches tall. Like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. When you're looking at a face on a screen.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. He looks like a normal human being, you said. That makes me laugh. And then he walks in and he's it's so nice to be meeting people, actually. I mean, we can't, clearly we're in a different country, but it's so nice actually now post the lockdowns to actually be with our fellow human beings.
Yes, as much tragedy as came out of this also came out of it a deeper desire to be in community with people.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. This has been just lovely, Katherine. I had a raft more questions for you that I didn't get to, but hopefully we can have another conversation in the future. Maybe after you get your channel up and going and you have a few more people under your belt, we can get together and talk about strategy.
Yeah, I'd love that. Thank you again. Thanks so much, Karen, for inviting me on, and I've really enjoyed speaking with you and listening to your story as well.
So for future conversations, I'll give it some thought.
Okay.